I speak 9 languages, said the son of the black cleaning lady. Arab millionaire laughed but was shocked. Haha. 9 languages. Hassan al-Mansuri's laughter echoed through the Manhattan penthouse office like the roar of a predator, amused by its prey. Kid, you can barely speak English. David Johnson, just 14 years old, stood in the luxurious office holding a worn public school backpack, his eyes steady in contrast to the humiliation burning his cheeks. Beside him, his mother, Grace Johnson, 42, held the cleaning bucket with trembling hands, knowing she had made a terrible mistake in bringing her son to work. Hassan al-Mansuri, a 48-year-old oil tycoon and owner of a $3.5 billion empire, was having the best day of fun he'd had in weeks. This black kid, the son of his cleaning lady, had just claimed he spoke 9 languages when Hassan doubted he could read an entire book in English. David, please apologize to Mr. al-Mansuri, Grace whispered, her voice heavy with years of submission and fear of losing the job that supported her 2 children on her own. No need to apologize, Hassan said, enjoying himself even more. I want to hear more of this fantasy. Tell me, boy. Wonder, what are these 9 languages you speak? David took a deep breath. At 14, he had already learned that the world judged people like him and his mother, before even getting to know them. Son of a cleaning lady, black, living in the Bronx. All labels that men like Hassan used to justify their contempt. English, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Italian, and Portuguese, David replied calmly, each word spoken with a clarity that made Hassan stop laughing for a second. Liar, Hassan declared, returning to his Italian marble desk. Grace, your son has serious fantasy issues. Maybe you should take him to a psychiatrist instead of bringing him here. Grace lowered her head, feeling the weight of familiar humiliation. For 5 years, she had cleaned that office, endured derogatory comments, and accepted low wages because she needed that job. But seeing her son, her bright and determined David, being ridiculed in this way, was a pain that cut deeper than any personal insult. Mom, David said softly, touching her arm. It's okay. Hassan watched the interaction with a cruel smile. He loved these moments of absolute power when he could remind people of their place in the social hierarchy. He had built his empire not only through business acumen, but through a calculated cruelty that destroyed anyone who dared to question him. You know what I think, Grace? Hassan leaned back in his $15,000 leather chair. I think your son is jealous of my executives as children who attend expensive private schools, so he makes up these fantasies to feel special. Sir, David interrupted, his voice still calm, but laden with a dignity that surprised Hassan. Do you speak Arabic? Hassan frowned. Of course I do. It's my native language. Then you would understand if I said or essay al-Hakika. The silence that followed was deafening. Hassan stared at David, processing the perfect words in classical Arabic he had just heard. This wasn't the basic Arabic that any tourist could memorize. It was a complex structure with advanced grammar and impeccable pronunciation. Grace looked between her son and Hassan, sensing that something had changed in the air, but not understanding what David had said. Where did you learn that? Hassan asked, genuinely confused for the first time in years. David smiled for the first time since he had entered that office. At the public library, sir. They have free language programs every afternoon. Hassan felt something strange stirring in his chest, a mixture of surprise and something that could be respect. No, that was impossible. He was just a kid who had memorized a few phrases. Anyone can memorize a phrase, Hassan said, trying to regain control. That doesn't mean you speak the language. You're right, sir, David agreed. That's why I brought this. David opened his worn backpack and pulled out a document that made Hassan choke. It was an official certificate of proficiency in multiple languages issued by Columbia, university with grades indicating fluency in all 9 languages. David had mentioned that that's fake. Hassan stammered, but his voice no longer carried the same conviction. David took out another piece of paper. This is my certificate from the Advanced Linguistics program at the Municipal Library, and this is from the online simultaneous translation course I finished last month. Hassan took the documents with trembling hands. They were all authentic, all stamped and signed by reputable institutions. This 14-year-old kid, the son of his cleaning lady, had achieved a level of education that rivaled professional diplomats. How was all Hassan could whisper? What Hassan didn't know was that David Johnson had a secret much bigger than simply speaking 9 languages. And that secret was about to destroy everything. Hassan thought he knew about intelligence, merit, and the true value of people. If you're curious to find out how a 14-year-old boy managed to outsmart a billionaire and want to know what devastating secret he was still hiding, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What Hassan didn't realize was that David hadn't shown up at that office by chance. For months, he had been planning this moment, gathering information and preparing a demonstration that would not only change Hassan's perception of him, but reveal a truth about Hassan himself that would destroy everything the billionaire thought he knew about himself. Hassan examined the certificates for several minutes, desperately searching for some evidence of forgery. But the more he looked, the more his arrogance turned into something close to panic. The signatures were authentic, the stamps official, the dates consistent with the 3-year academic progression. That still doesn't prove anything. Hassan muttered more to himself than to David. Anyone can take online courses. You're right. David agreed with a calmness that made Hassan even more uncomfortable. That's why I brought this. David took a tablet out of his backpack and opened a video chat app. Within seconds, the screen showed an Asian woman in an academic office. Professor Chin, David said in perfect Mandarin. Could you confirm to Mr. Al-Mansuri my performance in your business translation course? The woman on the screen replied in rapid, fluent Mandarin. Hassan didn't understand a word, but he could hear the natural flow of the conversation, the complexity of the grammatical structures, the ease with which David moved between different linguistic registers. Mr. Al-Mansuri. The professor switched to English. David has been my best student in 15 years of teaching. At 14, he is fluent in Mandarin like a native of Beijing. He is extraordinary. Hassan hung up abruptly, his hand shaking slightly. Grace, he said, his voice strangely. Did you know this? Grace shook her head, still processing what was happening. David has always been smart, sir, but I didn't know he 3 years. David interrupted softly. I started when I was 11. My mom was working 2 jobs to pay for my private school, but she lost her second job because of the pandemic. When I went back to public school, the classes were too easy. So, I decided to use my free time for something useful. Hassan felt a knot in his stomach. While his own children attended the most expensive schools in New York with private tutors paid by the hour, this boy had surpassed any education money could by using only public libraries and determination. But why languages? Hassan asked, genuinely curious for the first time. Because I wanted to understand the world, David replied simply. And because I realized that when you speak to people in their language, they stop seeing you as a stranger and start seeing you as a human being. The observation hit Hassan like a punch in the stomach. For years, he had used his Arab background as an excuse to keep his distance from American employees, citing cultural differences when the truth was simply arrogance. David, Hassan said slowly, You're 14 years old. That's impossible, sir. David smiled for the first time since he had arrived. The impossible is just the possible that hasn't happened yet. Hassan turned, looking at Grace for the first time in 5 years. He saw a woman who had raised a genius while working menial jobs, who had sacrificed everything to give her son opportunities. David, Hassan said, his voice changing in tone. Why did you come here today? Your mother could lose her job. David exchanged a glance with Grace, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Because I heard you on the phone yesterday, David said calmly. You were discussing a contract in Arabic with investors from the Middle East, but you made mistakes that could cost millions. Hassan turned pale. What kinds of mistakes? You used Mubashir when you should have used for urgency, and you confused Muraik with Muraib when discussing deadlines. Small mistakes that completely changed the meaning. Hassan sat down heavily. Those investors had seemed confused during the call, but he had attributed it to connection problems. In fact, his linguistic blunders had nearly sabotaged a $50 million deal. How did you know I was making mistakes? Hassan asked. Because I've been studying business Arabic for 2 years, David replied. It's my specialty. Hassan looked at David with new eyes. This kid was an expert in international business. Communication at the age of 14, David. Hassan said slowly. You saved my business without me knowing it. Actually, David said, pulling another document from his backpack. I did more than that. Hassan took the paper. It was a detailed proposal for restructuring the company's international communications, identifying linguistic flaws that had cost them contracts, and suggesting specific solutions. You analyzed my company, Hassan whispered. Just public communications, David explained. Press releases, transcripts, online documents. I found patterns of mistakes that explain lost business. Hassan read it twice. It was brilliant, detailed, and worth hundreds of millions in recovered contracts. Why did you do that? Hassan asked, confused. David took a deep breath. Because I wanted to show you that value isn't about your parents' money. It's about what you can contribute. Hassan felt something break inside him. For years, he had assumed that success was hereditary. that intelligence was a class privilege. This kid had completely shattered that belief. Hassan al-Mansuri, David said, using his full name for the first time. Can I ask you a question? Hassan nodded. If a kid like me can do this using public libraries, what could other young people like me do with the same opportunities your kids have? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Hassan didn't know that David's demonstration was just the warm-up, because hidden in that beat-up backpack was a recording that would prove that Hassan had lost million-dollar contracts, not because of linguistic incompetence, but because of something much worse. And David was about to use that evidence in a way that would forever change the balance of power in that office. Hassan was processing David's devastating question when the boy pulled one last item from his backpack, a small digital recorder that made the billionaire's blood run cold. Before I answer your question, David said calmly, I need to show you something. David pressed play. Hassan's unmistakable voice filled the office. These black Americans are all the same, lazy, uneducated, always blaming others for their failures. That's why I only hire Arabs and whites for important positions. Grace covered her mouth in horror. Hassan turned pale. Where? Where did you record this? Hassan stammered. In the elevator last week, David replied. Emotionlessly, you were talking to your vice president about hiring policy. You didn't notice I was there. Hassan remembered it perfectly. He had come down with Robert Chun arguing about why they didn't promote black employees to executive positions. He thought they were alone. That's illegal. You can't record private conversations. Hassan exploded. New York is a unilateral consent state, David replied calmly. Completely legal. And considering that it documents systematic racial discrimination, I'm sure the Labor Department would be very interested. Hassan felt the world spinning. A recording like this could destroy his company, result in million-dollar lawsuits, ruin his reputation permanently. What do you want? Hassan whispered. David smiled. But it wasn't a childish smile. It was the smile of someone who had planned every move of this chess game. I want you to choose, David said, walking over to Hassan's desk. You can continue to believe that people like me and my mother are inferior, and this recording will end up on the desk of every journalist and labor lawyer in New York. Hassan swallowed hard. Or you can prove that you really learned something today. I want you to promote my mother to facility supervisor with a salary of $80,000 a year. I want a scholarship program for young people from disadvantaged communities. And I want you to hire me as a junior language consultant. You're 14 years old, Hassan protested. And I speak 9 languages better than any adult you know, David retorted. Besides, I've already proven I can save your company millions. Hassan looked at Grace, who remained silent, but her eyes shone with pride and a dignity he had never noticed before. Grace, Hassan said, his voice breaking, you've raised a genius. I've raised a man, Grace replied firmly. A man who knows his own worth and won't accept being treated like less. David took a contract out of his backpack. I've already prepared the terms. You have 5 minutes to decide before this recording becomes public. Hassan took the contract with trembling hands. It was detailed, professional, and included clauses that protected both David and Grace from future retaliation. The boy had thought of everything. How do I know you won't release the recording even if I sign? Hassan asked. Because unlike you, David said, looking Hassan straight in the eye, I believe in giving second chances to people who genuinely want to change. Hassan reread the contract. The demands were fair, even conservative, considering the value David could add to the company. But signing meant admitting he had been wrong about everything. What if I don't sign? Hassan asked, already knowing the answer. David took out his cell phone. This recording will go to the New York Times, CNN, and the Attorney General's office in exactly. He looked at his watch. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. You're blackmailing me, Hassan said. I'm offering you justice, David corrected. You've spent years benefiting from an unjust system. Now you have the chance to be part of the solution. Hassan looked out the window at Manhattan, the city he had conquered through a mixture of intelligence and ruthless cruelty. But this kid had just outdone him on both counts. Grace, Hassan said softly, do you accept the promotion? Grace looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. I accept, sir. Hassan picked up a solid gold pen and signed the contract. David Johnson, he said, you just taught me the most expensive and most valuable lesson of my life. What lesson? David asked. That real intelligence isn't about where you were born or how much money you have. It's about what you do with the opportunities you create for yourself. David put away the tape recorder and held out his hand to Hassan. Welcome to the 21st century, Mr. Al-Mansuri. Hassan shook the boy's hand. feeling that he was making a much bigger deal than a simple employment contract. He was agreeing to see the world with completely different eyes. At that moment, David did something no one expected. He took 2 more recorders out of his backpack. "For your information," David said casually, "everything that happened here today was also recorded, including you signing this contract of your own free will." Hassan laughed for the first time in years. Not a cruel laugh, but a laugh of genuine admiration. "You're frighteningly smart, kid." "No," David smiled. "I just prepared better." Hassan thought he had learned the most important lesson of his life. But David had one last surprise that would reveal not only the extent of his planning, but also a secret about Hassan's own past that would change everything. The billionaire thought he knew about his own origins and the true meaning of merit. 6 months later, Hassan al-Mansuri was sitting at a round table in the Bronx Public Library, surrounded by young people from disadvantaged communities who were participating in the scholarship program David had demanded. The man who once saw public libraries as symbols of failure now considered them true centers of educational excellence. Mr. al-Mansuri asked Maria, a 15-year-old Latina girl, "Is it true that David got his first job at age 14 by blackmailing you?" Hassan laughed genuinely. "It's true, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." David, now 15, and officially the youngest language consultant in American corporate history, watched from the desk next to him, where he reviewed international contracts worth millions. In 6 months, his corrections and suggestions had generated $200 million in new business for al-Mansuri Industries. "Tell the whole story," Maria insisted. Hassan looked at Grace, who now wore elegant suits as a facility supervisor and had become one of the most respected executives in the company. She smiled, encouraging him to continue. "6 months ago, I was a rich but miserable man," Hassan began. "I thought my money made me superior to other people. Then David taught me that real intelligence has nothing to do with where you were born, but with what you do with the opportunities you create." "But how did he know it would work?" asked Carlos, a 13-year-old boy who is now studying programming thanks to the program. David looked up from the contracts. "Because I researched Hassan for months. I found out that he had grown up as a poor immigrant in Lebanon, arrived in the United States at age 16 without speaking English very well, and built his empire from scratch." Hassan nodded. "David showed me that I had forgotten my own origins, that I had become exactly the kind of person who discriminated against me when I was young." "And now?" Maria asked. "Now our company is the most diverse in the industry," Grace replied proudly. "We hire talent based on competence, not last name or zip code." Hassan stood up and walked over to a wall, displaying the certificates of the first 50 beneficiaries of the David Johnson Young Talent Program. "Do you know what the greatest discovery I've ever made is?" "What is it?" they asked in unison. "That when you invest in talented people, regardless of their background, they don't just grow, they make you grow too." David closed his laptop and joined the group. Hassan al-Mansuri had every opportunity in the world, but he almost wasted the greatest one of all, the opportunity to be a decent person. "What about you?" Carlos asked David. "Weren't you afraid of failing?" "Of course I was," David admitted. "But my mother taught me that the biggest failure is accepting to be treated as less than you are worth. I preferred to risk everything rather than remain invisible." Hassan looked at David with genuine admiration. The most impressive thing wasn't that he spoke 9 languages or analyzed my company. It was that he had the courage to confront a powerful man knowing that it could destroy his own family's life. "But you had a plan, right?" Maria insisted. David smiled. "Always have a plan, and always have evidence to back up your position." Grace stood up. "It's time to go, David. We have a meeting with Japanese investors in an hour." Hassan turned to the young people. "Want to know the best part of the story? David now makes more than I did at his age. Not through inheritance or privilege, but through sheer merit." As they walked to the company car, a Mercedes that Grace now drove as an executive, Hassan reflected on the complete transformation of his life. "David," he said, "I have a confession to make. What is it?" "You didn't just save my company, you saved my soul." David stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "I was becoming a monster. Rich, powerful, but completely empty inside. You forced me to remember that true. Success is when you use your privilege to lift others up, not to tear them down." Grace kissed her son's forehead. "I'm proud of you, baby. Not for the money or recognition, but for the man you're becoming." "And I," Hassan added, "I'm honored to have learned from both of you that family isn't about blood. It's about people who make you want to be better." That afternoon during the Meeting with Japanese investors? David simultaneously translated negotiations that resulted in a $500 million deal. Hassan watched, remembering the day he had mocked that same boy. After the meeting, a Forbes reporter approached them. Mr. Al-Mansouri, how does it feel to be the first billionaire CEO to have a 15-year-old advisor? Hassan smiled. I feel like I finally understand the true meaning of leadership. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about recognizing and nurturing the intelligence of others. And you, David, what's your advice to other young people? David thought carefully. Never let anyone define your worth based on appearances or circumstances. Your origins don't determine your destiny, and always have evidence to back up your claims. One last question, the journalist said. Do you believe this story can inspire others? Grace replied, this story proves that when you combine talent with opportunity and courage with preparation, there is no limit to what can happen. Hassan nodded. David taught me that true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you build, and that the smartest investment you can make is in human potential. David's story proves that real intelligence knows no color, social class, or age. If this journey of courage and justice has inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how knowledge is the only weapon that no one can take away from you. Hassan tried to use his wealth to humiliate those he considered inferior, but he discovered that he had completely underestimated the power of a brilliant, prepared mind. He learned that true power doesn't come from the money you have, but from the people you invest in, and that sometimes the greatest lesson in your life comes from those you least expect.